welcome to the MSU Libraries. My name is Stephen Canedo, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the library and to the unveiling of the Walter L. Wallace Sr. World War II exhibit, Bulldogs in Action, How Three Young Men of State Cleared the Way to Victory. How fitting is it that we're here today on June 6, 2023, celebrating the unveiling of the Walter L. Wallace exhibit, exactly 79 years to the day since the invasion of Normandy, D-Day, the events which are chronicled in this exhibit. We are so grateful to the Walter L. Wallace Sr. family for bringing this collection and this story to the MSU libraries. This is a story that features not just one MSU student and graduate, but three students who had major roles in the invasion of Normandy and D-Day. And throughout this program today, you'll learn more about Walter Wallace Sr. and the story of these three young men of state and their contributions. Before we roll into the program, though, I would like to take a moment to thank Walter Wallace Jr. and Dr. Stephen Wallace. Walter, Steve. I want to thank them so much for bringing this collection to the attention of the MSU Foundation and the MSU Libraries, and for their vision for not only honoring their father, but also for bringing this story and sharing this story with the MSU community. As you'll learn a little bit more, this is a remarkable story that they just learned about after their father's passing, and it's a great story that they wanted to bring to MSU and to share with us and assist the libraries and the university in sharing the stories of what the impact was that Mississippi State had on these young men, but also on World War II. We actually started these conversations 2 years ago. Yes, Walter, Steve, 2 years ago. But thanks to their persistence and vision, we now have the Walter L. Wallace Sr. Endowed Fund for Excellence, which will provide funding for the MSU libraries for years to come. Walter and Steve have been involved in every aspect of this project, from the selection of the location, and we looked at a variety of locations over the years. They have been involved in the selection of the graphics, the development of the design for the exhibit, as well as the narrative. And they did a little bit of editing and proofing for us as well, right? And I will mention that Steve is a great editor. He did a great job of making sure that we had all the T's crossed and the I's dotted. In fact, one night I received a message like at 11 o'clock at night that said, there's one little typo. And of course, this was after we had already printed the document, what you're going to see here. And you'll learn a little bit more about this, but YMS 247 was the ship. And I think in one place we had it as YSM 247. And he figured this out at 11 o'clock at night. So he is a great person. So Walter and Steve, we really cannot thank you enough for what you've done to honor your father and this story and bringing this to our attention and allowing us to share this story with the MSU community. This is something that will certainly live on for many, many years to come. We're very fortunate that we have the funding that they have provided in support of this endowment, but also the funding that was provided to assist us in creating this fantastic exhibit that you're going to see here in just a few minutes. So Walter, Steve, thank you so much. We really have enjoyed working with you over the last 2 years and looking forward to a continued long relationship. Before we go on with the program, I do want to take a moment and thank a few other people that have been instrumental in this whole process. And as you all know, pulling together something like this is never done by one person. It takes a team, and we have a great team here at the MSU Libraries. I certainly want to thank Dean of the Library, Liz Pankel, our business manager, Chris Cobb, who's here, our building services unit, Waverly Oakley and Trent Cochran, I think they're around here somewhere. They're the ones who assisted us in creating and retrofitting this particular space to turn it into an exhibit space. So thank them for that work. Also, Linda Graham, who is our special events coordinator. She assisted with the program today and the event, and of course the reception that we'll have in a few minutes. Our archives and special collections faculty who will be managing the collection and preserving the collection as we go forward. I want to thank them for all of their work. David Nolan, who will be speaking in just a few minutes. Jennifer McGillen, here in the back row. Carrie Massley, Lauren, Carrie Massley, Lauren Geiger, Emily Harrison, and Jana Hill all have been working on this project as well, and greatly appreciate all the work that they have done on this project as well. Also, I want to give another shout out to Carrie Masley. She assisted us in creating a digital exhibit, which will complement this physical exhibit and will allow us to continue to tell this story to even a wider audience. So you'll see when you're looking at this panel here to your right, there's a QR code and a URL that people will be able to click on that and go and learn more about the collection and the items in the collection. There's also a link to it, or there's a URL in the program that you can look at this later as well. So that's another great way to be able to share this to a broader audience. And certainly I want to take a moment and thank our library marketing and communication team. They've done an excellent job of helping us pull all of this together, led by Patty Archer. She's the director of marketing and communication. Her team put together, of course, the program that you see here, as well as all the graphics that are in the display. Ethan Burton here did the initial design of the program and the display here, and Diana Janis did a great deal of work also in the developing the program, but also the graphics that you'll see here in just a few minutes. And they really helped tell that story, and they did a fantastic job and have spent many, many, many hours on this, and so I want to thank them for that work as well. And finally, I would like to take one moment of personal privilege to thank someone else who has been instrumental in this process as well. She has been involved in this since the beginning, since day one, in fact, and that is our Director of Development, Trish Canetto. Trish, where are you? There she is. Trish is our Development Officer. Trish is our Development Officer and has been working with us on this project and many others for a long time, and she is my sister-in-law, so I can brag on her a little bit as well. But this is also probably, I guess, one of her last events that she will be participating in at the MSU Libraries, because she is retiring at the end of June after 38 years. Part of that was here at Mississippi State, and part of it as an educator in the Starkville School District. So, Trish, thank you so much for all the work that you've done on this project and helping it shepherd it to this point, and for all the other projects that you've worked on as well. Thank you so much. Let's give Trish a round of applause. Again, we want to thank all of you for being here. It's so great to see so many people turning out for this event. I'm so glad to see that the fraternity brothers showed up as well, of Walter and Steve. Some of the Pikes are here. And there were some stories being told last night about some of you. Eddie Keith, we will talk later. But we're so glad to have all of you here, and thank you for being with us. If you will, I would like to call your attention to the program. In just a few minutes, we'll have official remarks from Dr. Jim Dunn, who is the Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs here at Mississippi State. And then we wanted to tell you the story of how this exhibit came to being, and we've asked a couple of family members to come up and say a few words. So Virginia Wallace, granddaughter of Walter L. Wallace Sr., is going to talk about and read the story of the three young men of state, along with Stephen Wallace. Stephen over here. There are a lot of Stephens in this program, by the way. And then we'll hear from Walter Wallace Jr. On the Operation Overlord, followed by John Landrum, who's a nephew. John Landrum is a nephew to Lieutenant Wallace Sr., talking about the USS Augusta. And then we'll do the unveiling, and then I've asked Walter and Steve if they would take a few minutes and kind of talk us and walk us through the exhibit, so we'll do that as well. And then after that, we'll have a special presentation, and then David Bell will make closing remarks. Again, thank you so much for being here. Dr. Dunn.
So good morning and welcome. It's my great honor to represent the Provost's office and welcome you on behalf of our Provost and Executive Vice President, Dr. David Shaw. Just a little bit about me. I have a special place in my heart for the men and women who served in the U.S. Navy. My father was a Marine engineer, and his first job out of college was with the Bureau of Ships with the Navy Department, which later changed to the Naval Sea Systems Command, or NAVSEA, and he worked the better part of his career with NAVSEA. So when Stephen asked me to provide a welcome for this event, I was completely thrilled to do so. But I realized I didn't know very much about mines or minesweeping, and my only knowledge of mines came from that one episode of Gilligan's Island where that World War II mine washes ashore. Kind of looks like a coronavirus. And Gilligan has to diffuse it. Of course, students here have no idea what I'm talking about. It tells you how old I am. But minesweeping is exceedingly dangerous work, and minesweepers were literally the tip of the spear for most naval operations. We're going to hear about that in a moment. But in my brief introduction to minesweeping, I stumbled upon a book, Damn the Torpedoes, A Short History of U.S. Naval Mine Countermeasures, written by a woman, Tamara Moser Malia. And there's an interesting connection between her and this library. Before she was employed as a historian for the U.S. Navy, she received her PhD from Southern Illinois University, where she assisted editing 6 volumes of the papers of Ulysses S. Grant, which are upstairs currently. So Southern Illinois used to house the Grant Presidential Library, and now that's on our fourth floor. It's just a small world. So MSU is extremely honored to host the Walter L. Wallace Senior Memorial Exhibit, and extremely thankful for the endowment for the library. And I want to applaud the outstanding work of the Wallace family that they've done to help educate our MSU community. So thank you for coming, and with that, I will turn it over to the family to tell us all about the story. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you guys for being here. I'm delighted to be here and to be able to read this to y'all. So our Pawpaw wrote a little memoir, and I'm going to read the first page, and then Stephen's going to read the second. And he titled it, 3 Young Men of State. When the 3 young men graduated from Mississippi State College in 1939 and 1940, little did they know they were to be reunited for the Normandy invasion of the far-off France. The graduates were George Hammer of Waveland, K.O. or Kenny Wise of Jonestown, and Walter Wallace of Kosciuszko, Mississippi, all native Mississippians. Amazingly, each of these men was a commanding officer of the U.S. Navy minesweepers of the YMS class. These ships were ocean-going, wooden-hull vessels with crews of about 35 men and 4 officers. They were capable of sweeping mines of all types, contact, acoustical, and magnetic. There were about 20 such U.S. ships assigned the hazardous task of sweeping the waters off the coast of Utah Beach. Most sailed from Plymouth, England, ahead of all others to complete their sweeps before D-Day in H hour. Boat channels, fire support lanes, and troop transport areas all had to be swept before the arrival of the large ships. All this had to be accomplished in complete darkness and with minimal noise. There were occasionally artillery fire from the German-held shores, plus Allied bombers overhead were dropping their bomb loads on the area. It was an exciting experience.
Next morning, after their sweeps of the previous night, the minesweepers were H-hour witnesses to the heaviest bombardment ever carried out on a beach by warships. It was a grand and unforgettable thing to see and hear. After a lapse of 50 years, there is still a vivid memory of this occasion. All the YMS minesweepers survived the D-Day invasion of Utah Beach. However, in the next few months of operations, there were losses. There were victims of the German mines they were attempting to destroy. Happily, the 3 skippers from Mississippi State suffered no injury and eventually returned to their homes in old Mississippi.
As long as my phone doesn't fail me, I'll be fine. My piece, Walter L. Wallace, Jr. My piece is on what they called Operation Overlord. Operation Overlord was the code name of the Battle of Normandy. The Allied operations, the United States, Britain, and the Canadians, that launched the successful invasion of German-occupied Western Europe during World War II. The operation was launched in my presentation on June 6th, but as we just heard, it actually started late in the evening of June 5th when they started out, before everything else came aboard. 1,200 plane airborne assault preceded the amphibious assault involving more than 5,000 vessels. Nearly 160,000 troops crossed the English Channel on June 6th, and more than 2 million Allied troops were in France by the end of August. Before the D-Day bombardment and amphibious assault on Normandy, Walter L. Wallace Sr., along with 2 other Mississippi State graduates, Kenny Wise, as we just heard, from Uniontown, and he was commanding YMS 304, and George Hammer, as we learned, from Waveland, Mississippi, commanded YMS 350, YMS Yard Mine Sweeper. All 3 participated in the early morning hours of D-Day. These minesweepers were to be the first into Normandy coastal waters and were tasked with the highly dangerous duties of clearing mines, German naval mines, from the approaches of Utah and Omaha beaches. All 3 vessels were awarded a battle star for their participation in D-Day. Additionally, Wallace's minesweeper, YMS 247, was part of a special sweeping group that protected the battle cruiser USS Augusta. The USS Augusta was the command ship that Omar Bradley and Admiral Alan Kirk, both for all of the Army and Navy forces commanding officers. John Landrum will tell us more regarding Lieutenant Wallace's engagement with the USS Augusta after I complete. Ensign Wallace graduated from Officers Candidate School at Northwestern University on June the 16th, 1941. He graduated, you'll recall, in 1939. Graduated, accepted a position with a company in Birmingham, Alabama, went over, started working, and before he knew it, he had left him to go to OCS and become an ensign in the Navy. His D-Day minesweeper, known as YMS 247, was built in the Weaver Shipyard in Orange, Texas, on the Sabine River. Am I getting that right? Sabine, of course. Sabine, I knew I'd mispronounce it. YMS 247 was launched on October the 14th, 1942, and commissioned on May the 13th, 1943. So they weren't able to just push them out to shore and hope that they'd float. It took a diligent amount of time to get it done. YMS 247 was 136 feet long, with a beam width of 24 feet 6 inches, a displacement of 320 tons. It had a crew of 35 men, as you heard earlier, and a designated speed of 12 knots. Shortly after her commissioning in May of 1943 and service in the Gulf of Mexico, she headed up the East Coast to meet up with convoy UGS-33, which was later headed to England. On April the 20th, 1944, the convoy came under attack by German aircraft. UGS-33 lost several merchant ships during the fierce attack. YMS-247 arrived at her destination on April the 24th, 4 days later, intact, and formed up with the invasion fleet at Plymouth, England. YMS-247 formed up with the invasion fleet and arrived off the coast of France during the late hours of June 5th, 1944. She immediately began sweeping Utah Beach for German mines while under heavy fire from enemy shore batteries. YMS was able to complete her mission and return to England. Several of the YMS were lost at German mines, attacked by E-boats and shore installations. YMS earned 2 battle stars for her World War II service. Interesting to note, the Allies failed to accomplish their objectives for the first day. You've watched some of the movies, I suppose. But gained a tenuous foothold that they gradually expanded when they captured the port of Cherbourg on June the 26th in the city of Cannes. Steve, am I pronouncing that right? On July the 21st. Worth noting at this point, YMS 350, commanded by Lieutenant Hammer, was sunk off the shores of Cherbourg. YMS 304, that was commanded by Lieutenant Wise, was sunk also at Saint-Vaast, France. Lieutenant Wallace relinquished his command for YMS 247 in July 1944. At this point, he had completed his authorized assignment. John?
Thank you very much for including me in this, Walter and Steve. First of all, I want to say that my Uncle Walter was an exemplary individual. He was a terrific man. Not only a patriot and a member of the greatest generation, but he epitomized that of the Southern gentleman. He was a successful business executive for a career with United States Steel, a dedicated husband and father, and the type of man that if you had a son, you'd want him to grow up to be like Walter. He was really a terrific guy. Early in his career, he was assigned to these shipyards to see that these craft were constructed properly and on time within the budget. He told me that he realized if he didn't get into the war, he was going to miss it. He didn't want to stay on shore duty. So he asked his command in New Orleans if he could take this YMS 247 through the Intercoastal Canal before it was fully commissioned, get a crew in New Orleans, pick a crew in New Orleans, and then have it rigged out with the array that it needed to tow in order to cut the mine's cables and the other equipment that it needed, including navigation equipment, radio equipment, the deck guns that it would need. And they allowed him to do that. They went through trials in the Gulf of Mexico. As Walter said, it was commissioned in 1943. They continued to train and then got this convoy, took him to Plymouth. At some point during his training, in the English Channel, he got a radio message from the Augusta that Admiral Kirk wanted to have lunch with him and sent a PT boat to pick him up. I guess when you have lunch with an admiral, you're on time and dressed properly for it. I'm sure he was. Admiral Kirk was an extraordinary naval officer. He led the invasions, the Allied naval invasions, amphibious invasions of both Sicily and Italy. So he had great experience in this. During this lunch meeting, oh, by the way, after his naval career, he became the ambassador to Belgium, later the Soviet Union, and finally the Republic of China, Taiwan. Really an extraordinary career. At this lunch, Admiral Kirk, my uncle told me, spent very little time eating, questioning, and not an interrogation, but a well thought out series of questions to determine whether he really was committed and had the courage to fulfill this assignment. And of all of the naval officers that commanded minesweepers, he selected Walter Wallace. And he told him that what he needed was an escort for the Augusta on D-Day, and explained to him that Omar Bradley's staff, his naval staff, would be on board, and they needed protection from both enemy submarines and mines. So Lieutenant Wallace found two other minesweepers officers, men that he knew and trusted, and requisitioned 4 PT boats. And after he finished his minesweeping activities, he rendezvoused with the Augusta. The sweeping that he did and these other ships into Utah Beach was extremely dangerous, as Walter pointed out. It was not only did they risk mines going off too close to their boats and destroying them or capsizing them, but they were in daylight. They were strafed by enemy aircraft, the Luftwaffe, and then the E-boats were pinned at the port in Cherbourg, which was just around the corner from Utah Beach. It was closest to these E-boats, and they were lethal. They carried 4 torpedoes, depth charges, and they had deck guns, Bofors cannons, and 37mm guns for anti-aircraft. Anyway, the E-boats in April of 1944 sunk 2 LSTs that were practicing in Devon in the English Channel for the Omaha Beach landings, and those 2 ships lost 750 Americans. So they were very lethal and very dangerous. After the sweep that he did at Utah Beach, he rendezvoused with the Augusta, and the 3 minesweepers, swept the channel out to about 2,000 yards from the Augusta where it was anchored. They stopped. The PT boats were doing their search for U-boats, and they were under the command of Lieutenant Wallace. At some point during the morning, Omar Bradley decided it was time to leave Utah and move up the beach where there was a problem at Omaha Beach. Utah was interesting. They not only was the channel cleared, but the current actually pushed the landing craft about a mile from their actual targeted landing place, and but they successfully came ashore, and they were led by Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., who was Teddy Roosevelt's oldest son. So Bradley told Admiral Kirk, we need to move up the beach. We've got problems at Omaha. So Kirk gave the command to the bridge of the Augusta to fire up the engines and move on. So bridge radioed Lieutenant Wallace. His minesweepers continued with their activities. And very quickly, my uncle turned around and saw that the Augusta was rapidly overtaking them. So he radioed the bridge of the Augusta and told them that he could only sweep making 8 knots. And his top speed, if you pull the array in, was 14. So the bridge immediately, the captain of the ship immediately throttled the engines back. Well, Omar Bradley heard this. It was a lot of noise on those big ships, and he had a meltdown. He was under a tremendous amount of pressure. And as my mother would say, he addressed Admiral Kirk using some very bad words. And Admiral Kirk was unflappable. He was unintimidatable. And he asked one of his staff members, why did we slow down? And his staff member said, well, we've got to allow the minesweepers to do their job. And Admiral Kirk looked at Bradley and said, I'm sorry, General, but we'll get to Omaha Beach. When we get there, we've got to protect this boat. Well, Bradley wasn't satisfied with that. He was still furious. But my uncle used to joke that on D-Day, he gave a command that countermanded the order of the invasion commander. And he used to joke with his naval retirees and his buddies that that was the case. But in fact, he did. His communication with the bridge required the ship to slow down. So he did give a command that countermanded the order of Omar Bradley. And anyway, he was quite a man and quite a patriot, and to be much admired. Thank you very much.
Wow, thank you, Virginia, Stephen, Walter, and John for putting all of this in context and sharing those stories with us. I know that that was a challenge, but also an honor for you to do that. At this time, we'd love to unveil the exhibit, and I'll ask Steve, John, Walter, Steve, John, Trish, and these two gentlemen to my left, Dr. Dunn and David, come up, and we will unveil the exhibit. Somebody else can fill it for you. All right, so we'll take the gentlemen, if y'all want to come forward. We're going to actually grab this part of it here. Okay. Pull it on up. And we'll, before we do that, there we go. And it should come loose. And at this time, I'd like to get Walter and Steve to talk a little bit about the exhibit and kind of share with you some of the stories and some of the items that are in the exhibit.
Steve, we ought to start here, I suppose. Steve actually wrote this piece. It talks about actually the start of World War II. And I believe the date, Steve, was September the 1st, 1939. Of course, that was the Germans going into Poland. And from there, he gets into John's story. But this is the base of information that we offer to anyone that's strolling through the second floor of the library that gets you started, gets you thinking about World War II. So we've got the story. Steve, you've got the legend.
Yeah, it identifies everything in the exhibit and tells a little bit about it.
Tell us about some of the items
I
that are in the exhibit.
We've got a ship's clock, we suspect, from YMS 247. The picture under there is Dad and the other officers going across the Atlantic, I do believe. Correct me along the way.
No, I believe that's right. They would have been in their uniforms for maybe 10 minutes, taken the picture, and then gone down below and taken those off and put on something practical.
Yeah, I suspect, like it's here, it's pretty dang hot out there in the Atlantic. The letter
that Stephen and Virginia read to you earlier, it's duplicated here. lieutenant, the sword, and then the three gentlemen that we talked about. Wise, Hammer, and Lieutenant Wallace, all of them being lieutenants. Steve, I think it's kind of interesting. We had seen this background at the New Orleans D-Day exhibit, which we highly recommend if you've not had an opportunity to go down and actually see it. It's worth the trip because it covers the whole war. But we adapted it, and Stephen's crew found a way to make it the backdrop for the whole presentation. And it does in fact show, as John behind me pointed out, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, and Sword. And John, tell them who was where the British, where the Canadians, and where the Americans were going ashore.
Utah and Omaha were all American. Gold and Sword were the Brits, and Juneau were the Canadians. And Bradley, of course, commanded the Americans, and the General Dempsey was in command of Gold, Juneau, and Sword. The putative commander of all of the invasion was General Montgomery, Bernard Montgomery, but Americans didn't take orders from him. They took orders from Eisenhower. Somewhat resented the British commander. But,
Yes, thank you. Excuse me. Steve, some of the stuff on the bottom?
Yeah, the medals Dad came back from the war with, I hate to say it,
9.
yeah. His commanders had, he was made full commander in 1954, help me with the date,
Yeah,
July 1st.
I think that's right, July 1st, 1954. Of course, the D-Day, he was a lieutenant.
His Navy belt, dress uniform belt, that he would carry the sword with. Of course, we said he was a Mississippi State graduate. He played in the band. That's his letter. He had a K-bar knife that Stephen helped us identify, which I had never heard before. Walter and I played mumbly peg with it.
Still got our toes.
Yeah, all toes. Commencement book, 1939, June or May, I forgot. But a lot of the people that we were in school with in the 60s, their dad graduated with our dad in 39. This is interesting here. Here he is. This is in June of 44, next to the smokestack, and you see the swastikas. How many we say were on there?
18.
Something like that, but one of the crew members wrote that he thought they had gotten over 30, and which he thought was a record for all the minesweepers. But at the time, they had not achieved that yet. Here's Dad, graduate of OCS, Northwestern.
As an ensign. Steve, the one in the middle is a replica of the orders for...
Yeah, Walter has the top secret orders that, and Dad had them, and when Mom passed them, Walter received them, and
Virginia?
Virginia, yeah. You made them last. I don't know what that's called. Anyway, and they did. You displayed them in a well. Anyway, we made copies. We didn't want to give that up.
Stephen is still bartering for those original orders. But
I've got mine.
Virginia is a graduate of Agnes Scott College in Atlanta, or Decatur, and an anthropologist, archaeologist. And Steve and I knew nothing about preserving anything, although we did manage to get a few items here. But they needed to be preserved, and Virginia pointed out that we were doing a miserable job of it at the time. So she said, give them to me. We did, and she put them in a beautiful album with some pictures that were left to us. And So we've still got them, and we're still negotiating with Trish and Stephen Canetta on getting those original orders. But you can, if you can tell, they're yellowed very well. They're aged.
They're not as detailed as you would like to think. It really talks about propeller speed, RPMs,
Locations, at what hour.
It isn't as detailed as you would like. I mean, only a naval officer could understand why they were written the way they were, I suppose. But,
Steve, this was his banner off his ship
yeah.
and his dog tag, I believe, laying on the grip of the sword.
We saw the commissioning pennant for the USS Augusta in New Orleans. It's in their museum. And it looks about the same as this one. This one's really worn from the weather, the wind, the sun. But anyway, we had it. It was just laying around in different places in our house. At least in mine it was. But
We had to
anyway,
do a lot of gathering
very happy to
put it together.
give loan this to Mississippi State for display, because that's where it should be sent. It was, some of this stuff was simply in my garage, the clock, the pennant, but we proudly display it here, thanks to Mississippi State.
Thank you. Yep. When we started these conversations over 2 years ago, we could tell it was very heartfelt conversations, difficult conversations for the two brothers, as we refer to them, the Wallace brothers, to talk about their dad and how proud they were of their dad and all of his accomplishments, but also to turn loose of some of these objects that they have held on to. So we greatly appreciate them thinking about the broader audience and letting them tell a larger story. So thank you again for that. We know it was a difficult decision to turn those over to us, and we certainly do.
But you promised you'd put them in a safe.
That's right. That's right. They will be well protected. So at this time, I would like to see if there are any questions that you would like to ask John, Walter, or Steve about the collection or the exhibit.
I wonder, did your father talk about the war much? You know, we always...
No.
No.
No. John was lucky. He heard stories. I was lucky. I heard stories. Steve was fortunate. Typically, it was after he retired and left Pittsburgh, U.S. Steel, and moved to Pensacola, where he could go out on the aircraft carrier and shop at the base in Pensacola, the Naval Air Base in Pensacola. That's where we heard some of the stories. You may have heard in Houston, Beaumont. Yeah.
The story John told, Dad didn't tell Walter and I. We didn't know about it.
We're very fortunate that John has a good memory.
Those men came back, they probably had PTSD that they didn't know anything about, and didn't want to talk about the war. They wanted that behind and forget it. I need to go on to my career. And Dad was so happy to get back to U.S. Steel. That's where he wanted to be. And the Navy kept recalling him. Got him in the Korean War. We went out to Norman, Oklahoma. And then we finally got back to Birmingham, and he with U.S. Steel, and they made him a commander of the Navy program.
Training base, Graymont.
Graymont Avenue.
That's where
So we just, and Walter and I'd go out there and play on the gun, you know, make that thing swivel around. We had some good times.
Yes, sir.
I was interested, curious, if they blow up the mines, how did they stay out of sight and delay short batteries?
Well,
from
they could
finding-
actually shoot them with a rifle if they saw it. If they could cut the cable, chain cable, as it was, cut that cable with arms that they could throw out into the water that were below the water level, cut them, bring them to the surface, and then shoot them with a rifle as they passed by.
So they did detonate them with rifle fire?
Right. they could. That was one option. Kenny Wise and George Hammer realized that you couldn't run over them because they both lost their ships in various locations after D-Day. But we know that all of them got back because in Dad's letter that Stephen and Virginia read, it did share that all three got back safely.
They wanted to detonate these mines as far away as they could, so they also had 50 caliber machine gun mounted on the boats that had a much longer range, 1,500, 1,700 yard range, that they could detonate them.
Up on the bow.
But it was a dangerous business they were in.
Why don't you comment to this group on the significance of the wooden hulls?
Well, a metal hull, of course, would be magnetic, okay? That's not, I guess, the first thing you think about, a wooden hull vessel. But that's the way they built them at Weaver and other locations throughout the United States. That's the way they were built. They understood that a lot of these mines were magnetic. We've got pictures of the Germans setting the mines out. And obviously, I can't tell. You see the spears coming off, the tails coming off, thinking that they're contact mines. But they had some mines that were acoustic. All they had to hear was that propeller, 50 yards, 25 yards, I don't know the distance, but they would go off. And that perhaps was the way that Kenny and George lost the other two vessels, 304 and 350. YMS 304 and YMS 350. Wooden hulls. Thank you.
Some of the scary ones would hide on the bottom and count the number of ships going past them. And then after 20 or 30, they'd blow up. And I don't have any idea how the Navy got them.
Yeah.
But they were very sophisticated at that time. And that was Eisenhower's greatest fear was the mines.
The German mines.
So what they all did was a spearhead.
Catherine.
Yeah, so I was gonna ask why the Y for yard on YSM, but it sounds like they were using yardage to track the mines away from where to detonate. That's the tracking distance?
Steve, do you know the significance of yard?
Yes, I think these wooden ships were used mainly in the naval yards in the U.S., but they were tasked with going over to Europe and doing that.
One of the things that we didn't tell in the story, but Dad would occasionally, while they were still outfitting the vessel, go out into the Gulf of Mexico and pick up sailors off of merchant vessels that had been sunk in the Gulf of Mexico by German submarines. They were that close. I've got a compass that came off of a boat where they were picking up sailors.
I learned something. I didn't realize he went to officer school before Pearl Harbor. Did he ever, you said June of 1941?
Yeah.
I read that in his orders. He would graduate. What did I say, June 16, 1941.
Did he anticipate
I
the
don't
United
think he
States?
did. The letters I've seen, he didn't anticipate Korea or Greyhound. I think after World War II, he wanted to be out of the Navy, but they wouldn't let him go.
And certainly after 20 years and he retired and got his pension check, I suspect he was happy. My guess, my speculation.
They were happily retired in Pensacola next to the Naval Air Station.
He used to love to go out on the aircraft carrier and watch watch the pilots take off and land on Yorktown,
Lexington.
Lexington.
Any other questions? All right, at this time, Trish and I would like to make a special presentation to the two brothers and John. This is obviously, as we said, has been a labor of love for us, but also for Steve, John, and Walter, and we greatly appreciate all the work that you've done in support of this, and certainly the gift and the donation to the MSU Library. So we have a small token of our appreciation. This is a replica or a rendering of the exhibit we wanted to give to each of you that will hopefully remind you of what you've done here at Mississippi State. So thank you all. Thank you.
Can I get a picture of all of you showing you?
Sure.
Thank you. I'll send you an email address.
Oh,
All right, well, very good. It is my privilege here today to close us out, and so I'm going to try to take my cue from General Bradley and not slow us down as we have a very nice reception awaiting us here. But I do want to say a few more words of thanks. First off, I want to thank the Wallace family for being willing to partner with us in sharing this story of your family's history. So thank you very much for being willing to do that and to work with us here. And I also want to thank again all the MSU personnel who have been involved with this project. And one person, I want to single out one of the Stevens who's here today and thank him in particular. Stephen Canetto, thank you for really spearheading this effort and bringing everybody together on this project. So thank you, Stephen. We really appreciate it. And then just thanks to everyone for being here today. I would invite you to please take a closer look at the exhibit. Please stay around and join us for conversation and also for some delicious food here. So thank you very much. Appreciate you being here today.